Please now help me welcome Senator Lieberman. Senator Lieberman is a longtime supporter of the resistance. He's consistently pushed for tougher policies toward Iran, to stand up, to be strong, and to fight for democracy and human rights, values which he has argued to be inconsistent with those of the Iranian regimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back with you, to see my dear friend, fellow colleague Kelly Ayotte, to thank Senator Boozman for hosting this meeting in this great room, and just to say thank you for the organization of Iranian American communities for once again bringing us all together at a really critical time in the fight for freedom in Iran. So Kelly and I were blessed, really, to be senators, in my case, 24 years. But one thing you know is when you're a former senator, you yield to current senators. So I'm going to proceed, but I'm going to look for any sign from my friends that another sitting senator, busier than I at the moment, is coming in, and I'll be glad to yield and maybe even come back if there's time. Let me start this way. When the history of the world in this year, 2022, is written, I believe that two dates will stand out as turning points in international relations. The first is February 24th of 2022, which was the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. The second is September 16th of 2022, the day that a new wave of anti-regime protests led by women began in Iran after the death of Mahsa Amini. And those protests continue today, the 84th day, 7 weeks later. My friends, during the last decade, we have come often to this historic room and to many others on Capitol Hill to protest the government of Iran, to stand with the people of Iran. But this meeting today is different because those protests that began on September 16th continue not only undiminished, but broader and deeper and more steadfast than ever before. What's happening now in Iran is inspiring, but it's also unprecedented since the Islamic regime took over more than 4 decades ago. This has become a genuine uprising, and I think it's time to start calling it what it is, a revolution to liberate the people of Iran from the totalitarian government that has enslaved them for too many years. So this remarkable historical event gives each of us, and today focus on our representatives in Congress, unprecedented opportunities that we maybe didn't dream would happen this soon, but it also gives us responsibilities to support the heroes of the revolution in Iran and to do everything we can to help them achieve their goal, which is and must be no less than the overthrow of the totalitarian terrorist regime in Tehran. And let me say first that as we consider what should happen now, we have a responsibility, historic and moral, to look back and to pay tribute for all who have held this hope of a free Iran alive for decades now, courageous Iranian patriots both inside and outside the country. And I will say in this regard that no organization has done more to light candles of hope and freedom through the darkest days of repression and mass murder in Iran than the National Council of Resistance in Iran, led by Mrs. Mariam Rajavi. And really, history must note that, but we can begin it by noting it and expressing our appreciation itself. Somebody once said to me long ago, comparing fire and water, that if you pour water from a pitcher, there's less water in the pitcher. If you take a light on a candle and light another candle, the first candle burns as brightly as ever. And now, if I may consider this and continue this metaphor of the lights that NCRI, MEK, Organization of Iranian American Communities, have been lighting for decades are now being held high. They've been spread by millions of Iranians. And as I said, what is true is that the torches that NCRI held up for years and have now been lighting the other candles throughout the country have not diminished at all. The torch of the NCR-MEK grows brighter. In my opinion, with each passing day, the organization gives us confidence that the current regime will be overthrown, and most importantly, that when it is, there will be leaders ready to guide Iran smoothly into its free and democratic future. And that is the organizations that you're part of. Now, as we look forward, I think we've got to ask ourselves, what can we ask of our leaders in Congress to do on behalf of the freedom fighters in Iran? Here's what I want to say in terms of what we can ask now. Bob's been a great leader on this. First, the administration and Congress have to face reality. It's impossible to make any trustworthy agreements with the regime in Tehran. With their words and deeds, they have shown so clearly that they are implacable enemies of the United States, and they are totally deceitful and therefore thoroughly unreliable. I was sorry to see in just the last week that Secretary of State Blinken, who I respect and like, has said regarding America's desire to end Iran's dangerous nuclear weapons development program, that the U.S. always prefers diplomacy. So do I. So do we all always prefer diplomacy, but not with a country like the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has repeatedly slammed the door to diplomacy in our face. It's time for the U.S. to stop currying favor with the Iranian regime. It's time for the U.S. to stop trying to appease the regime, even by attacking the worst enemies of the regime, including the NCRI. It is time for the U.S. to walk proudly and defiantly away from the demeaning negotiations with Iran for a new JCPOA. That game is over. Okay, second, and I'm going to try to go through these quickly with deference to Senator Menendez. And Bob, if at any point I no longer have the right to filibuster, so I don't want to do it to you. Second point I want to make is that President Biden really ought to deliver an address, a public address on Iran, speaking to the people of Iran, speaking to the Iranian diaspora, speaking to our people, and speaking to the world in full-hearted support of the freedom fighters on the streets of Iran and against the government of Iran today, which is clearly an enemy of the United States. Third, the U.S. government should ask our E3 allies in Europe to invoke snapback sanctions under Security Council Resolution 2231. That would formally end the JCPOA and restore the international arms embargo on Iran. Fourth, the U.S. should continue to work with Starlink and other companies with similar capabilities to provide free and secure internet for the Iranian people. Fifth, the U.S. should create a special channel exempt from U.S. sanctions to disperse frozen Iranian funds in foreign bank accounts to striking workers inside Iran. The convergence of labor and political protest represents a really significant threat to the Islamic Republic. Sixth, the President and senior members of the administration should hold private and/or public meetings with members of the Iranian diaspora, Iranian dissidents, and opposition groups, including this group. Given the connection of your membership to Iranians fighting for their lives on the ground, establishing such a communication would be invaluable both to our government and to the Iranian freedom fighters. Seventh, the Congress should hold public hearings on the protests in Iran, as Senator Menendez has already done, God bless him, including particularly the threats that have been made by the government of Iran against American citizens. Eighth, the U.S. should work with and encourage social media platforms like Instagram and Twitter to stop Iran's cyber offensives in suppressing the voices of Iranian activists through tactics like shadow banning. Ninth, the U.S. should expel former officials of the Islamic Republic who live in the U.S. and are sympathizers and supporters of the Iranian regime, and you know who they are. 10th, the U.S. should encourage our allies and partners to isolate Iran diplomatically. The Europeans still don't do that. They should reduce the Iranian diplomatic presence, shutter their embassies, refuse meetings, and support the U.S.-led effort to strip the Islamic Republic of its membership in international organizations. 11th, the U.S. and our allies in Europe should pursue multilateral sanctions against Iran's most senior leadership, including the Supreme Leader and Raisi, making use of our respective Magnitsky Act authorities. 12th, the U.S. and Europe should focus on the families of Iranian regime officials who are living in the U.S. and Europe and revoke their visas and confiscate their assets. Similar efforts have been used successfully against the Russian oligarchs in the aftermath of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. And finally, here. Thank you. And 13th, the U.S. government should strictly enforce our sanctions that are already on the books, legal authority, including seizing Iranian oil tankers. My friends, I know that's an aggressive set of recommendations, far-reaching, but just think of what the government in Iran is doing. It's firing weapons at the peaceful protesters. In the last few days, it's begun to execute protesters they've arrested after sham trials, and they deserve the 13 points that I've raised and much more for what they're doing and what they've done. Today, the people of Iran are putting their lives at grave risk in a heroic revolution against their government for the same values that are enshrined in the American Declaration of Independence. There are values. Will we stand passively by and allow our enemies, sworn enemies in the Iranian government, to prevail Will we look back and say, why didn't we do more at this turning point in history? Or will we do everything we possibly can to help the people of Iran achieve victory? The moral answer is clear. The answer in the interest of the United States of America and our values is clear. We must act boldly in support of the freedom fighters now on the streets of Iran. We're entering a time of religion, if you will, religious observance, as Kelly said so beautifully. So I end with a somewhat religious political statement from Thomas Jefferson. And these were the words that Jefferson originally proposed for the Great Seal of the United States. And they're particularly apt for a government that claims to be religious, as the one in Tehran. Jefferson suggested these words: rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. So, in sum, in Iran today, America must stand against the tyrants, with God and with the American people. Thank you very, very much.